because one of the things at the beginning that was, I think, probably the most, like, ironically out of touch knock on the company at first, because if you remember, I mean, like, the first year or so, first year or two in the company, all I heard about, like, from people who went in the dressing room, you know, like veterans that were there and people in the company, was like they'd never seen a dressing room like this. And it was like, you know, yeah, there was inexperience as far as management went, because so many of the people in that company that were in charge had never worked in wrestling, all at the same time, never worked in a management capacity in wrestling. So many new people. And so, you know, you're going to make mistakes based on that. But the harmony in the dressing room was incredible. Like nobody had ever seen before. And I remember, like, people doing this all friends wrestling, and it's like, dude, what built that company was that exact fact. Now, that wasn't going to last forever, but when that harmony was gone, that's when things, you know, in the long run, you started really having your problems. You know, it was when everybody was everyone had a common goal. They didn't all agree on how to reach that goal. You know, everyone had a different idea, you know, and everyone's going to have a different idea of what is the right thing to do, what's going to engage the most number of fans, how you combat being, you know, you're in a fight with WWE, whether you want to be or not, you are. How do you do that? How do you react to that? So everyone's always going to have it, but it was a very harmonious thing for a while, and then, you know, it changed. And, you know, the change wasn't for the...
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. Today, we're going to talk about Dave Meltzer and his comments, which are kind of a sequel to the Voices of Wrestling article about CM Punk taking AEW's external innocence. Essentially, Dave Meltzer concurred by saying that there was a great deal of harmony within the first year or two of AEW, and that it had a very harmonious locker room. And then once that went away, the company actually started to diminish a little bit. So the reason why I'm doing this video is because we need to talk about why it was so harmonious. And it's one of the things that is often left out of the conversation of when AEW first started, that most of these people were just cronies of the elite. Yes, it was all friends wrestling. Now, the all friends wrestling concept, I forget where it comes from. I'm not sure if it comes from Jim Cornette. I'm not sure if it came from Cody, but it comes from 2020. That much is for sure. So let's talk about this, because how true is the whole all friends wrestling thing anyway? Well, we all know that it was mostly true. That AEW, the elites, were hiring mostly their friends into positions in the wrestling company. This is where you get, I believe, the Dark Order, who were friends with the elite, Jack Perry, Hangman Page. The only reason anybody cares about Hangman Page is because he's a skin tag on the ass of the elite. You have Brandon Cutler, Michael Nakazawa, several, just more people that I can think of and count off the top of my head that were mostly just friends of the elite. So then WWE had a big round of releases. All right. So that leads to Cody making the all friends wrestling comment. Now, I'm not sure this was before or after Jim Cornette coined the term. And made it sort of popular in the wrestling space. But Cody said this because Zack Ryder was released. Zack Ryder, a.k.a. Matt Cardona, is Cody's best friend. And everybody expected Matt Cardona to get a job in AEW. In fact, he did one match in AEW and then disappeared. So people were questioning, like, wait a minute, why didn't Matt Cardona go over to AEW? So this is what Cody said at the time. This is from April of 2020. Yes. He's one of my really close friends in wrestling, maybe my only friend in wrestling. I have my brother in AEW. I have my beautiful wife, and they all do the work. This can't be all friends wrestling. You have to handle it the best way. If you put on a Nightmare Family jacket, you've got a massive bullseye on your back just in the locker room alone. It's a total heat seeker. So you get a little bit of comment there. One, he doesn't want it to be all friends wrestling. He doesn't want all the nepotism and all the cronies, and the Elite do, because this is how the harmony, the oh, and everybody talks about how great the locker room is. It's because everybody are friends. All these people are cronies of the Elite. Yeah. Now Cody is in the Elite, kind of. He's tertiary, but he's in there. He's part of the group. But as you can see, even in 2020, he's talking about how the Nightmare Family gets a little bit of heat. And this is in their harmonious locker room. And again, 2020, this is a year before CM Punk shows up. So CM Punk ain't there to blame yet. The Revival, they're not there to blame yet. Cody's talking about just the Nightmare Family being a problematic issue within AEW. So, of course, it's now being known as All Friends Wrestling, but not everybody gets a job because Cody didn't hire all of his friends while the Elite and Chris Jericho and all these guys did. Even a guy like Jon Moxley was able to get a friend of his. I think he got him a spot on AEW Dark. I'm not sure. I don't think it was a recurring spot. I think he maybe did a couple of matches here and there. But for the most part, even Moxley was getting his friends brought into AEW. And that was what made the locker room harmonious. When everybody talks about the good old days of AEW, when they're talking about 2019 and 2020, what they're talking about is nobody questions the elites or the EVPs. Nobody had anything negative to say because the only reason these people even had jobs was because of the elites. Now, let's go into the 2020 one more time. I don't know how many of you remember Jim Ross. Jim Ross made a comment on Dynamite about all these guys clustering up like coils or whatever, and when they do the dives off the top rope. So I forget which episode of Dynamite it was, but the match that is being promoted is 7-on-7. And Brandon Cutler tweets out this: "We're going to go outside, cluster up like coils, stand there in a huddle, friends and foes together, side by side to catch some leaping idiot going off the top. Can't wait. 8 p.m. TNT. Hopefully for 1 million viewers. Let's effing go." Now, I don't know how many of you remember this, but Jim Ross made a comment on, I believe it was his podcast, about guys clustering up like coils to catch people off the top rope. So this is also from 2020. This is what Jim Ross actually said. This was I believe an interview that he a criticism that he had of the company. He says, "I told a kid the other day at AEW that everybody does the same fucking spot. All you guys go outside, you cluster up like coils, you stand there in a huddle, friends and foes together, side by side, so you can catch some leaping idiot going over the top who never wins with this move. They're looking for the holy shit chant. They love to hear this is awesome. It's a spot, folks. It's a trapeze act. I don't buy into that. The DDT is a great finish and should be used as such." So then Brandon Cutler, as I said before, was mocking Jim Ross. This is a guy who's never done anything in wrestling, but because he's got friends in the right places, he gets a job. So this is called out. Jim Cornette tweeted out an example of the All Friends Wrestling group taking JR's valid criticism and wiping his ass with it because he's friends with one of the bosses and he got his job that way, not through talent. This is why AEW Wrestling for Kids by Kids programming is so embarrassing. Of course, it's hilarious to sit back now and think about how Jim Cornette has been in a 4-year war with AEW, but he's not wrong in this comment. These guys all got their jobs because of who they're friends with. If this meant a harmonious locker room is nothing but nepotism, it's like one big family reunion, or is you and your gamer group, then yeah, it would be very harmonious, but that's not a business. A business is people who are indeed like-minded, who come together for a singular goal. And the better the goal is, how many people can you really get to go in with it? If the only people you can get to agree to the goal are your friends, then you're not doing a very good job. So Meltzer is talking about this thing, and the locker room, it was so harmonious. Why didn't you tell the reason why it was so harmonious? Because the Young Bucks were only hiring their friends. Kenny Omega was bringing over friends of his from Japan, whether it's Michael Nakazawa, whether it's Riho, whether it's Hikaru Shida, and it was basically some other people too that he knew from Japan that they was bringing over. But mostly it was friends of the Elite. Now, the very first AEW Tag Team Champions, if I remember correctly, were SCU. Frankie Kazarian, Scorpio Sky, Christopher Daniels. Now, Christopher Daniels and Kazarian were friends with the Young Bucks in Ring of Honor. Frankie Kazarian ends up leaving AEW for reasons we'll be discussing in 1 second. But then Christopher Daniels actually gets a job as head of talent relations. Now, this leads to him, of course, getting booted from Collision when CM Punk was running the show. But in the midst of all this, Frankie Kazarian left AEW. Now, this is a guy who was a friend of the Elite. And, they did a lot of stuff with the Elite on the show. But Frankie Kazarian's reason for leaving was not really discussed that much online. I forget where these quotes are coming from, but I do remember these quotes. I believe I'm not sure if it's Kurt Angle's show or some other show. But Frankie Kazarian said, "I was there when this was a germ of an idea. I was there discussing this company when they didn't even have initials attached to them. In these rooms with Cody, the Bucks, Hangman Page, and Scorpio Sky and Christopher Daniels. So again, I was committed. I was like, I want to try to ride this thing out. It just became apparent to me that what I like and what I appreciate about pro wrestling and the way that I like it presented was not happening at AEW. That's not an indictment on them. It's just what they perceive as good television wrestling are different things. And just the business model, everything. Again, it was one of those things, and to this day, I feel like I have so much more to offer than what I was being utilized for at AEW." So that was one of his comments. Another of his comments, he says, "The thing that I have is the most valuable that I can give to anybody is my time. The thing that I can ask the most out of anybody is to give me their time. That's the one thing that all of us are running out of. Everybody on planet Earth. My time in professional wrestling, in my eyes, is long from being done. The time that I have left in the ring, I wanted to give that time to somebody that would value it. I felt at the time in AEW, my time and contributions and talent was not being valued. That's okay. I had the opportunity to take my time and give it to somebody else. That's exactly what I did." So, you've had people who've been there from the beginning who were criticizing the company, and they were often being mocked, and sometimes people kept it quiet. Kazarian was very professional. He didn't go out and trash talk the company while he was working there. He was gone first, and then people asked him why he left, and he explained. He says, "When I left last year, I still had 2 years left on my contract. I probably could have been there much longer. I re-signed at the end of 2021, and in hindsight being what it is, I probably shouldn't have. But again, AEW, I was there since the day one. It just became apparent to me that what I like and what I appreciate about pro wrestling and the way that I like it presented was not happening in AEW." So, Meltzer acknowledges this a little bit by saying that, oh yeah, well, people had their differences of opinion. They had their differences of opinion. It's like, yeah, a lot of people had differences of opinion, but they were cronies at the time. And nobody wants to rock the boat because, again, everybody's trying to make this paper. All right. But I know that a lot of the AEW fans, they want to blame CM Punk. That's kind of what they're doing here in sort of vague terms. But if you look at this whole thing, you see that Frankie Kazarian, it was one of the guys who was a friend of the Elite, who was there from the beginning, who didn't like the presentation of pro wrestling in AEW, but he kept quiet about it because he wanted to make that paper. And then things got unbearable. Cody left. The things with CM Punk started to really kind of shake up a little bit, and he wanted to get the hell out of there. And you see this from the beginning. Again, go back to 2020 when Cody was talking about the Nightmare Family and everybody in AEW was talking about the Codyverse. Now, interestingly enough, this is what Kenny Omega had to say about what Cody Rhodes was doing in AEW. He said, and I quote, "When Cody had his way of going about things, I wasn't sure how to follow up with that, nor was I interested. There was Kenny doing his thing, the Bucks doing their thing, and the Codyverse over there doing whatever it is he does." He also said, we had the Bucks and their vision, my vision, and Cody's vision. All of our visions are different. I would say mine was more similar to what the Bucks had envisioned, and Cody's was much different. So that explains why the Codyverse even existed in the first place, is because Cody had a different vision of what he wanted for wrestling and what he wanted to do with AEW. Now, the fans have said it was more sports entertainment, what Cody was doing, because he was doing weigh-ins and bringing in celebrities and all this kind of stuff. So these conflicting visions of AEW has caused a tremendous amount of problems. This is why Frankie Kazarian left. This is why CM Punk, got into fights backstage with the Elite, because you had a young company that was full of people who were nothing but cronies, who had no earthly idea of what they were doing. And then they kept arguing about what they wanted to do on television. But the people who had the largest number of cronies were the ones getting to make the decisions. So Cody carved out a little piece of the show for himself. They called it the Codyverse. Then they began to ridicule it until he left. CM Punk came in, did the same thing. They ridiculed that too, calling them collision colliders and all this kind of stuff. And, basically marginalizing them. They also marginalized House of Black. They also marginalized the Revival. They also marginalized Miro and Andrade and several other guys, even some young guys too, like Ricky Starks, basically got pushed to the margins of the company. And it all started because the harmony that was the faux harmony, the fake harmony within AEW was a bunch of people not wanting to rock the boat because everybody trying to make this money. So the harmony was only temporary, as Meltzer admitted. It was only going to be temporary anyway. But the harmony never really existed because you had 6 different people sit down and talk about their visions of wrestling. Because you have to talk about Tony Khan too. Tony Khan is not like an invisible player in this thing. He had his own vision of what pro wrestling should be. And then when Jon Moxley came in, he became such a huge star that he got to make his vision. That's where you start getting a lot of death matches on television and pizza cutters and exploding power bombs and all this other horse shit, right? So you had all these guys bringing all of their crazy ideas to the table, and AEW being the place that was kind of a whiteboard where you could do Japanese strong style wrestling and then do death matches and then bring in Mike Tyson and have Shaq wrestling in a match. And you can have all this stuff because there was at least some opportunity there that you had some sort of creative control over your product, at least what you were doing. And when they had that, the show was very schizophrenic. You weren't sure whether you were watching the silliest show on earth, a serious blood and guts show, a WWE light kind of product. You weren't sure what you were doing. You had Jericho and MJF doing musical numbers. You've got Moxley falling through glass. You got Cody doing long story time promos. Then you got later on CM Punk comes in. He's doing long story time promos too. He's trying to do really gut wrenching stories built off history and all this kind of stuff. And you're not quite sure what AEW is at any given time when you're poking your head in. And to some degree, that's a good thing. Some degree, that's a bad thing. But the idea was that we started this thing, because I know we jumped all over the place, is that there was some sort of internal harmony to AEW that was ruined over time by other people interjecting. And by other people, usually they want to blame CM Punk. He is the Fire Lord in this situation, who attacked their wonderful, peaceful Earth village and destroyed it and set everything on fire and ruined it. But in reality, the poison was baked into the cake because Cody wanted to do something that was vastly different than what Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks wanted to do. Cody didn't feel like he could bring his friends in. He didn't bring in Mark Cardona. He had the opportunity to do so. But the Young Bucks, no problem. All of our friends get a job. We will bring in our friend's mother to do the job. Remember they had one of the best friends. One of the recurring gimmicks was their mom driving them to the arena. They just had no filter. They gave no fucks. It was all about PWG on television. That's what it was. You got a PWG guy doing commentary. You've got silly horseshit going on television. And of course, at first, people are going to be intrigued by this because they'll say, what the hell is going on here? And you get a little bit of everything. Like I said, Moxley ended up coming in. So you got some blood and gut stuff. You got Cody doing stuff with celebrities and trying to get mainstream attention. And then you've got the Young Bucks doing very, very niche indie wrestling crap on the show. And they tried to make all of that work. It wasn't going to work. Cody did them a favor by leaving. And then they brought in CM Punk, who seemingly is even more traditional than Cody. And that created the schism that was brawl out, that created all this problem in the first place. But the poison was baked into the cake already. The idea that it was called All Friends Wrestling wasn't because everybody got along. It was because every single person you could see on that television, you could trace them back to the elite. They were not signed because they were great. They were signed because they were friends of the elite. And that is what made other people think that they were great. So All Friends Wrestling was literal. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't that everybody who comes into AEW just is like, oh, I love this place. This place is fantastic. What it was a house party filled with teenagers, and their friends kept showing up. And other people would invite their friends, and they would figure out, I don't really like this crowd. So now you're at the party, but you're kind of standing in the corner, nursing your little drink, watching everybody else. They're watching people swing from the chandeliers, or they got, beer goggles on, and it's like a frat party where it's like somebody's trying to have a 25 and up white party in the middle of a freshman class frat party. That's kind of what's happening here. It's so different. It's for two different audiences. These things cannot coexist. It was inevitable. So while Meltzer is trying to kind of hand wave away the internal schism of AEW from the very beginning, I went back to 2020 and showed you that even if it was just Jim Ross criticizing the product and these guys mocking and making fun of Jim Ross, a year into the company's existence, before the Revival were there and their podcast started causing a problem, before they started whispering about Andrade wanting to leave, or Miro wanting to leave, or Malachi Black wanting to leave, or before CM Punk put his hands on anybody or cussed anybody out, they were making fun of Jim Ross. Interestingly enough, everything about AEW on screen is also reflected in the commentary, which is very interesting. I'm not going to read the quote from Cody, but Cody talks about the commentary booth, where he talked about PWG, Excalibur, talking about younger wrestlers, and he knows a lot of the moves that they do because he's been on the indie scene. He's seen a lot of these people before. But then you got, Jim Ross, who's been a commentator for 40 years. He's a recognizable voice, the voice of a generation. He knows how to call things. He knows how to bring energy to the show, but he doesn't, he's not up on the newer way of wrestling. And then you've got Tony Schiavone, who's sort of the glue between the two. He's younger than JR. He's older than Excalibur, and he has some way of trying to bring it all together. And if you look at it from that perspective, you see that that's what AEW has been trying to do since their inception. They've been trying to mix old school, new school, and mix it all together. And it's not working out. because it just pisses everybody off that you're trying to do, 90s WWF, shit from Japan, shit from the 2010 Indies, and all kind of other stuff on one show. It just was not making sense. Now, I will say the show is more cohesive now, much more cohesive now, but it's also far more boring now. And the show is just super boring right now. But the idea that AEW was some kind of harmonious place is like, it's untrue. Jim Ross was criticizing the product. Cody criticized the backstage locker room area. It was what it was. Now, eventually these things blow up and they become public, which is what happened. But just because it blew up in 2022 or 2021 doesn't mean that it wasn't in motion before that. It meant that they tried to put the top on the pot while it was boiling over, and that may have helped a little bit. But eventually, if it's going to boil over, it's going to boil over, and that's exactly what happened. So, All Friends Wrestling, it was a sleek, very nice, humorous concept, and it was true on paper. But underneath that, it wasn't All Friends Wrestling because not everybody got along. Not everybody agreed about what wrestling should be, and not everybody agreed with what they should be doing on television. So thank you guys for your time. I'll talk to you guys later.
MagMongoSlade.
Best house I ever drew, Daddy.